time in your afternoon to spend with us. We are thrilled to have you all join us here today. My name is Lisa Belcher Nelson. I am a counselor and assistant professor at the Western Campus. I am joined here with Magda Gomez, who is, we are co-chairs of the Women in Equity Task Force, and we are thrilled to have you here today and welcome you to this afternoon. So we are not going to delay or waste time. We're going to get started right away with the introduction of our guest speaker today. But before I do that, I would like to remind you, please, as you're entering the room, please mute yourselves. And also, if you have questions, if you want to make a comment, the chat is available and we will check that frequently to monitor. As well as you can use the hand raise option if you would like to ask a question or share a comment, or if you want to send in a smile or a thumbs up to our speaker, please feel free to do that as well. Today, our guest speaker is going to be Ms. Charmaine Brown. Charmaine is an entrepreneur, inclusion, equity, and diversity expert, community capacity builder. She is the founder and president of Connexions Consulting Incorporated and is a passionate inclusion advocate committed to helping leaders draw the connection between inclusion behaviors and high-performing and profitable organizations. With over 28 years of experience in strategic human resources, diversity and inclusion, human resources compliance, and philanthropy. Charmaine's experience spans a range of industry, including real estate, banking, healthcare, and nonprofits. Definitely a woman you want to know. She has demonstrated expertise in building inclusion and diversity programs from infancy to national recognition. Additionally, she has cultivated an extensive network of community partnerships and relationships with national, regional, and local aimed at enhancing community capacity building efforts. It is without further ado that I invite you to share in this hour we're going to spend together with Ms. Charmaine Brown as we tackle the topic of intersectionality.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. I'm exhausted listening to my bio. I don't know how I do it, but we make it happen some way, shape, or form. But I am really excited to be with all of you today. I want to also thank Magda for giving me the opportunity to spend some time with you all. I want to do a quick check to make sure that you all can hear me. So give some thumbs up, give a heart sign. In the chat, say, I can hear you. Wonderful. Okay. So let me go ahead and share my very, very busy screen here. You'll oblige me for a second. All right. I want to get thumbs up again that you can actually see the PowerPoint on the screen now. Excellent, excellent. So we're going to talk today about the crossroads of intersectionality. And I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with all of you. But before I do that, Lisa shared my background. I just want to give you just a quick little snippet about Connexions Consulting. We are an organizational development firm, and we spend a lot of our time helping organizations to create a more culturally competent, equitable, and inclusive workplaces and work environments. One of the things that's really unique about us is that we really spend a lot of time creating communities of safety, support, and empowerment, because we know that there are complexities around the DEI journey, and we help you navigate those things. Yes, I founded this organization back in 2015. I am a Clevelander by heart, although I live in Detroit, Michigan now. I, kind of wanted to remain married to my husband, who had a huge opportunity to grow his professional career. And so we made the decision to take the leap of faith and move here to Detroit for his job. And that's what allowed me to start up my practice now, almost 7 years later. So, really, really, really excited to be here with all of you. Now, one of the other things that I will share with you, yes, I've got a husband, I've got an amazing 14-year-old daughter, and I also have an adorable Yorkie who may, in fact, make her debut today while we are here together for this hour. So a little bit of a, notice up front, but she's cute. So hopefully you won't mind. Now, what are we going to do today? So with the time that we have, we're going to go over a few objectives and a few ground rules, but I'm going to set the stage for you as to why we're even talking about intersectionality and what it really means to you in the roles that you have at the at the college, but also in your lives, right? So everything that we learn in the workplace are things that we can adapt and utilize in our personal lives. We're going to examine intersectionality in greater detail. And so we're really going to talk about building this foundation of understanding intersectionality in a way that can be useful to you. And then obviously I wouldn't be doing my job if we didn't talk about how to apply the principles of intersectionality in the classroom as well as in the workplace. I'm going to leave time for questions and answers, but if you have some burning questions that you want to get answered as I'm going along, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Lisa and Magda are going to help me to monitor the chat because I am really focused on sharing this information with you. And so I don't want to miss anything. So they will be on guard to help me out today. Now, I want to talk kind of high level. What's the high level results, key results and takeaways that we want for our time today? It's important that we all have some shared language, right? That we understand when we're talking about particular topics, that we understand what we mean, because it allows us to build our commitment level as an individual, but also as a team, and obviously as an organization. When we're thinking about leveraging DEI and DEI principles as a way to achieve positive incomes, both internally and externally. And for purposes of our conversation, I'm going to speak, when I'm speaking internally, I'm talking about all of you, the workforce, the workplace, right? Your colleagues, how you work together, the teaming environment that you have. Externally, I'm going to really focus on your students and the community. Okay, so just so you know what I'm speaking, what the language that I'm speaking when I'm talking internal and external. The other piece of this is at the end of the day, I know it's really important to to advance the DEI journey. And where we get the biggest opportunities to do that is when we create an environment of open dialogue and inclusive behaviors, right? That allows us to continue to move through the journey, to learn more, to understand more, so that we're really creating the organizational culture that supports this idea and these goals that we have, but not just to continue to embed them, but we want to make sure that we're thriving. And so that's really important. And then obviously having the tools and the techniques in order to optimize the opportunities that DEI brings. Now, more specifically, my objective for you walking away today is really, I want you to think more deeply about intersectionality, and in particular, the role that you play specifically in the classroom and in the workplace in terms of building a more equitable environment, right? This really helps to create the best community, the best space for not only you, but also for your students and the community. Obviously, we're going to examine those key concepts, tools, and techniques. And I want you to walk away with some practical solutions for intersectionality that you can leverage in your daily lives. Okay? So I want some thumbs up if you are cool with those objectives. All right, I see a couple some thumbs up going up. Absolutely wonderful. Okay. Lastly, before we really delve in, I've got a couple ground rules. These should not be a surprise to anybody. But whenever we're learning something new or we're deepening our awareness and understanding of a particular topic, it is really important that we keep an open mind. This next one around multiple realities can exist at the same time. At the core of what we're going to be talking about related to intersectionality, this statement alone, keep that in the back of your mind, right? It is possible that multiple realities can exist at the same time. And we're going to challenge you to really sit in this particular ground rule or this position. And I think intersectionality really kind of forces you to do that. It's also important that we listen to understand. You're going to be breaking out into a little breakout room to talk a little bit more about the concept. And it's important that we also put our listening hats on. And as I like to say to those extroverts, make space, right? So make space for others and take space for those of you who are more introverted and more observant and would rather kind of sit back and listen to everything. So we're going to make some space for those who need to speak up, and we're going to take space for those who we really want to hear your voices in the conversation. I also want us to all think about assuming positive intent. And most importantly, the last two, I want you to use the chats and the emojis, anything that comes to mind for you, a question that you have, an aha moment, yes, Charmaine, yes, speak my language, anything that is on your mind. I would love for you to use the chat, use the emojis, and listen. The work of DEI can be very complex and it can be very heart. It's a lot of heart work. I think that even in spite of all the challenges that we have, we can have fun learning. So I challenge you to also have some fun while we spend our time together, okay? So how's that sound for everybody? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. All right. I hope one of these days someone can tell me how I can look at the chat while I'm also presenting. I can only be perfect 99.9% of the time, okay? Expand the pit. Okay, maybe I'm getting faces. All right, we're just gonna roll with it. All right. So setting the stage. Why is all this important? And maybe if I do this, nope, that's not gonna work. I thought maybe I could expand the screen, but we're going to keep moving. And Magda and Lisa, you are going to stop, share with me if there are questions.
We got you. Don't worry, we got you.
Excellent. I'm riding blind here. So, all right. So knowing the value, why should we know about this? One of the things that I think is going to be really interesting and to continue to explore as you navigate all the different aspects of DEI and in particular intersectionality is thinking about intersectionality mindset, because it is going to activate, it is going to continue to bring to life this notion of inclusion and equity for students in the workplace. Students and in the workplace. It's also going to provide an incredible lens when we start examining our practices, our processes, our policies, our curriculum, and our structures that unintentionally increase the risk of students in the workforce experiencing these disadvantages and discrimination because of those intersecting identities. Knowing the value also helps you fully exercise your unique voice and agency. And I think that is really at the core of what inclusion and equity is all about. And having those diverse voices at the table really is kind of speaks to what we're all talking about. And then empowering you to access the power that you actually have within you, within groups, to be creative and to be innovative. Because I like to think that sometimes when we're not focused on certain things, we're leaving opportunities on the table. I do a lot of work in the corporate space. And when I say we are leaving money on the table, that gets at people, right? Nobody wants to miss opportunities to be financially successful, but also opportunity successful, right? And so being able to understand and leverage the principles of intersectionality will help us to mitigate some of those issues, as well as to uncover things that we may have unintentionally missed. And then obviously at the end of the day, it's going to help you, it's going to help others. And we, as we think about how we navigate through overcoming experiences of oppression, I don't think there's anyone on this call that is saying I am intentionally oppressing folks. So we know that when we know better, we do better. So that's kind of the why, all right, why we're even talking about this at a high level. So let's dig in a little further. Before I talk to you about what intersectionality is, I want us to kind of take a step back and think about some foundation. And this slide should not look unfamiliar to you. This slide, we call this the diversity wheel, and it speaks to the dimensions of diversity. We're going to use dimensions and identity kind of synonymously for purposes of this conversation. But as a working definition, we're gonna, and trust me, I've worked with lots of different companies. Everyone typically describes diversity in some similar way with some extra words or definitions added to it. But at its core, diversity is defined as the similarities and the differences that we all possess, right? So when you look at this diversity wheel, you see that there are three categories of dimensions: your internal dimensions, your external dimensions, and organizational dimensions. Within internal dimensions is things like your gender, your physical ability, your race, nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and age. When we start thinking about the external dimensions, it's your social status, your parental status, your economic status, your faith and spirituality, right? How you dress, where you live, what schools you went to, right? And then organizationally, all of you represent different divisions, departments, job classifications, years of service, seniority. I know there's a lot of seniority at the college, which is awesome. Management status, right? So thinking about all of these dimensions really makes up who we all are. Now, obviously, there are subgroups to this, right? As you start to look at this wheel, and I want you to start thinking about what is my identity or my dimensions, right? When I think about my social status, when I think about my race and ethnicity, right? My marital status, like start thinking about yourself, because we are going to do an exercise leveraging this diversity wheel in a few minutes. Okay? Thumbs up, you get it? Awesome. Leading with the blind here. All right. So getting into what is intersectionality. And I think most of you probably have heard of or know of, many of you may have already studied Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality to use as a framework for understanding oppression. So when I think about intersectionality, I think about we all kind of come from different standpoints, right? Which is the intersection of our various identities, our race, our gender, our differing abilities, our sexual orientation, our class, etc., right? Because various forms of oppression like racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, classism, and you can go on, those play across these identities. We all have very different experiences of privilege and oppression based on where we stand. So there are multiple forms of oppression, and they can be experienced simultaneously in ways that make it so difficult for us to explain or to identify with others. So I'll give an example. Some of us, like myself included, experience sexism. Some of us experience sexism and homophobia. Others experience sexism and homophobia and racism. Still, others experience sexism and homophobia and racism and ableism and transphobia and fat phobia and classism. And we can go on and on and on, right? You kind of get my drift, right? We can experience all of these levels of oppression and privilege very simultaneously. Now, when I first started learning about intersectionality, I thought about that it was that some of us have a burden and some of us have more burdens, and that we have to remember that that's important to understand, right? But intersectionality is a little bit more than what I think our common knowledge of it is. And some of you may have heard the example, and I'm going to give it to you in the same way, right? So you're standing on 9th and Euclid. Yeah, I'm from Cleveland, so I know what 9th and Euclid looks like, right? You're standing in the middle of 9th and Euclid, the intersection of that. And you can't say whether you're on 9th or you're on Euclid. You're actually on both, right? It's both of them. It's more than both. It's mixed, right? So you can't say, well, I'm on 9th. And you can't just say, well, I'm on Euclid. Actually at the crossroads. You're at the intersection of 9th and Euclid. So Crenshaw argued that the intersections of oppression are like this. And when she coined the term, it was really grounded in Black women feminism, the Black women feminism movement. But she speaks to the fact that Black women experience racism and sexism in a way in which you can't really parse out where one stops and where one begins. The racism changes the shape of sexism, and the sexism changes the shape of racism. But at the intersection, what's really left for folks is a particular racialized form of misogyny and a particularly misogynistic form of racism that targets Black women specifically. So that's kind of where it came from, right? Again, kind of thinking about it's a distinct and unique experience, not a compiling one, right? I think there are some misnomers that say that it's just piled on top of each other. That's not the case. It's very distinct and it's very unique. So as we think about how this plays out, particularly in the courts, and why Kimberly Crenshaw really studied this idea, is where it was very hard to prove, and again, the grounding of where this came from, it was very hard to prove that Black women experienced sexism and racism. It was believed that since white women were doing well in a particular environment and Black men were doing well in a particular environment around racism, that sexism didn't exist, right? And racism didn't exist because white women were not experiencing levels of sexism. And so there was this gap. Black women were saying, wait a minute, that may not be happening to you, white female. That may not, sexism may not be happening to you, white female. Racism may not be happening to you, Black male, but it's happening to me. And unfortunately, the courts looked at either or, and Black women in particular were still experiencing these levels of oppression. So that's where it came from. I love the quote that says, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. That's what intersectionality is, right? That's what it is. Okay. I, I am, just so I can see where we are, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen to make sure that there aren't any questions in the chat. All right.
Currently, there are no questions in the chat. Charmaine, you're good to go.
All right. Okay, awesome. So that tells me you're processing, and I love that. And it tells me that this next exercise is really going to get thinking. So in the beginning, I shared with you, we're going to provide you with the PowerPoint and also a worksheet with this particular activity. But I'm going to ask you to pull out your pen and pad. We're going to move into this next exercise. And yes, I have a very, very messy desktop. No judging. All right. So remember we talked about the diversity wheel, okay? And if I didn't say this before, nowhere on this diversity wheel did it say it excluded the white heterosexual male over the age of 40, okay? This is everybody, okay? And I know that the college does a really good job of defining what diversity actually means versus equity versus inclusion. So I'm going to run through these questions, and I'm going to do them, relatively quickly, because I want you to be able to go into your breakout rooms and have a conversation about this activity, okay? So I'm going to ask you a set of questions related to your identity, and I want you to just put your first response, and you can use the diversity wheel to reference some of the identities or dimensions, okay? All right, so the part of my identity that I am most aware of on a daily basis is the part of my identity that I am least aware of on a daily basis is the part of my identity that was most emphasized or important in my family growing up was the part of my identity that I wish I knew more about is the part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against is The part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is. The part of my identity that I believe is the most misunderstood by others is. And the part of my identity that I feel is difficult to discuss with others who identify differently is. So I'm going to leave this up here for just a second in case you need to go back and fill in your responses. Okay. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a second. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, hold on for a second. Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is to go, we're going to break you up into rooms. There's going to be about, I think, 9 or 10 rooms. And I'm going to throw the questions in the chat. They're pretty simple. What I want you to do is describe how it felt to respond to those questions and any themes or ahas. Okay. We're going to give you about 10 minutes in each of the groups. And would it also be helpful if I threw the questions in the chat as well? I think I'll just go ahead and do that. Hopefully. So that way you'll have them to respond to.
Charmaine, just let me know when you want me to do the break.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just posting them now. And all right. So you'll have 10 minutes in your group. Again, the questions you want to discuss is describe how it felt to respond to these questions and any themes or ahas. All right. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Let me guess. You all needed more time, right?
Yes.
I know it's always like that. It was like, we can go on and on for forever, but I appreciate you all. Hopefully you all had an opportunity to share. I would love, in the interest of time, I would love for you to throw in the chat some comments that were shared. Maybe, just tell me how did it feel to respond to the questions? Were they easy to respond to? Difficult to respond to? Certain types of questions were difficult? Just throw some of your comments in the chat. Yes, Lisa. Lisa raised her hand.
I was just going to say I did a little break room hopping, and the one consistent thing that I heard was, I've never heard these questions before, one comment. And the other comment that was consistent with the groups that I went around to was, I've never heard this before and I never thought about it in that way.
Yeah.
So, that was pretty consistent in my room hopping.
Yeah. And I think that is exactly why I wanted to do this exercise with all of you, is because we have a tendency not to think about our identity in a lot of different ways. And part of the reason this is important is that as you start to roll your sleeves up and understand what intersectionality is and how it plays out in your workplace and then in the classroom, understanding yourself better actually helps you understand others, right? So if I know that I have intersecting um, levels of oppression and privilege, right? I might be a little bit more mindful when I'm interacting and dealing with others. So I want to really encourage all of you to spend some more time with the exercise and and really think about this. So I'm kind of reading Catherine's. I thought most of the questions were easy to respond to, largely because I've done a lot of thinking about these issues in recent years. Yeah, I can say that that's probably a lot of people can relate to that. Andy mentioned identity, and the concept of safety with identity is nuanced. I'm a fairly open person, but sometimes it's challenging at first to discuss identity quite as frankly without establishing some trust and security with people in the group. Very, very much so. Very well taken. And I would encourage all of you to find your communities of trust to go through this exercise with. Lamont, the questions were easy. I've done class assignments using the diversity wheel. Good exercise and reflection. Okay, great. Yep. The intent was really to have you to start thinking about your own identity. And I know that for some of us, it's easier to do, and for some of us, it is more challenging. But I encourage you to continue this up. You'll have in your boxes after today the deck and the worksheet to continue to explore your identity. Okay. But thank you so much for leaning into this exercise with me. And I am going to share my screen again and kind of round out our conversation because we've got a little under 10 minutes left. All right. So we kind of we've talked about setting the stage, why it's important to understand, why it's important to have perspective of how this fits in with your DEI framework and the goals that you have in place. We've talked about what intersectionality is as a whole. You've done some exercises to kind of get you thinking about your own identity and where maybe there is a crossroads of or an intersection of identities that play a role in your levels of privilege versus levels of oppression. And now I want to give you some practical principles and tools and resources for applying intersectionality, both in the classroom as well as in the workplace. That we know when we give out tips, it helps to raise your awareness in terms of developing this intersectional mindset and really what the intent of this is around helping you to build a more inclusive environment for your students and obviously within the workplace. So some things that we all can use, and this is an everyday practice for all of us again, is to check our own privilege, right? Going through that exercise again really helps you to identify where your identity, you're at a level of privilege with your identity. I can tell you for certain, I know I'm at a level of privilege because I went to a suburban school. Yes, I'm a shaker girl. I was a shaker cheerleader. Right, versus my roommate who I went to college with, she was from the inner city of Detroit, right? We had different levels of experiences. I also want to make sure that you're thinking about this idea of listening to learn instead of listening in order to respond, right? These are simple ways that we can start to listen with a lens of intersectionality that helps us to maybe better understand some of the challenges and opportunities that our colleagues are facing, our friends are facing, the communities that we're facing, all the things that we've been hearing over the past few years about oppression and all the isms that we're experiencing in our country. It's important that we watch our language. Again, probably the quickest example is the use of pronouns, right? Being mindful that not everyone subscribes to he and she, right? Being mindful of what type of language we're using when we're interacting with others. And then important, build a community of accountability and support. One of the comments was around, this exercise is kind of difficult to do when you're not in a community of trust. So start to build that, right? Build a support system. You all are community because you are part of the Tri-C organization. Your community when you work with each other in different departments, right? So start building your communities to support each other and hold each other accountable when you see that there are certain challenges. I shared with the last class, or the last group that I spoke with a couple of weeks ago, one of the tools that I use a lot and I share with my clients is when someone says something that feels uncomfortable to you or feels like a slight, the use of the word ouch is a really powerful tool to use. Ouch allows you to stop the conversation. And for that person who you felt slighted you or said something that you didn't agree with, it allows them to stop and say, what did I say? Right? And then you can have a conversation so that that individual can clarify their meaning, right? So the usage of the tool that I use is called ouch, and I'm hoping that will be helpful and supportive to all of you. Now in the classroom, some of you are working in the classroom. I want you to be aware and address how the intersecting identities can clash and also be in conflict with one another. When when you have sessions with your student and there's a topic that's being discussed and there's differing opinions, it would be interesting to ask yourself, okay, what lens are they coming from? And how can I help support navigating them through this conversation so that we can do things like check our privilege, so that we can listen to learn, so that we can make space, so that we can support different language that's more inclusive. And so those are some of the ways that you can do that in the classroom. I also want to challenge you to be curious and see difference as an asset. And I think that that also applies to all of us, right? Even in the workplace. Difference is an asset. It is not a deficiency. I think what we tend to do is because it's so difficult sometimes to deal with difference, we run away from it instead of looking at it as a huge opportunity for us. So I want you to think about that in the context of a classroom, in the context of your students' experiences and what they're sharing with you. The other thing I also want to share with you too is that, give those students visibility so that they don't have to fight to be seen. Sometimes we might interpret those students that are sitting in the back of the room that seem like they're not engaged or they're not participating. We just kind of write them off, right? They really don't want to be here. I don't know why they're here. And sometimes we can have very challenging interactions with them. But have we ever thought that maybe they have experienced a time where they had to fight to be seen and they just shut it down, right? So kind of bring that perspective to those experiences. Be interesting to see if you might be able to shift and turn that experience around for that student if you have that perspective. It's also important that you engage in those conversations around intersectionality, around privilege, around discrimination and oppression. I have a friend who says, call the thing, right? I recognize that we have to get comfortable with the content. We have to get comfortable with the views and how to express those views in the classroom. But I think it's also important to just call it what it is, right? And make sure that you're teaching language of inclusion very explicitly and examine how you can use language as a useful tool. Again, we talked about language, right? The usage of certain words that either incite conflict or incites inclusion, right? And so you want to be mindful of those things when you're in the classroom, when you're engaging with your students, and when you're operating in the spirit of an intersectionality mindset as well as an inclusive mindset. Okay. Now, I just want to say this. I think as I stop sharing my screen, one of the things that I think is really important in all of this is that we start to open up the dialogue around these topics that will continue to further and advance the work that you're already doing. I'm really proud of the work that Tri-C has accomplished over the past several years around the DEI space. And intersectionality is yet another component of this work. And it can be very, it's complex, right? Everything is complex. And so I don't want you feeling like you have to walk out being experts today, because you're not. It's okay. But if you walked away with at least one nugget that you can use today and that you can use in your interactions with your colleagues, your interactions with your students and the community, that's a good thing. And so I'm going to end by saying thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and spending this time with me and leaning into the exercises. And I just want to open it up real quickly with the few minutes we have left to see if there are any questions that you have. So what I can say is, and Magda, don't kill me for saying this, but um, I know that 1 hour can't cut it to learn all there is about intersectionality. So if you want more, let Magda know. Put it in the chat. And you want more time, you want to put it do in person, let Magda know, because I know that she works really hard to try to bring these great opportunities back to you. Andy, this took me back to my psychosocial identity development course in grad school. It was great. Awesome. And I am not I am not a professor. I am not a PhD. So I am thank you, Andy, for sharing that feedback with me. Summer. So understandable definitions. It will serve me well as continued. Awesome. Thank you, Summer, for that feedback. Yeah. The continuous journey, right? That's what all this is about. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you. Awesome. Well, you all have an amazing rest of the week. And I look forward to hopefully connecting with you. My information will be in the deck. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, for spending time with us today. I know that we didn't ask a lot of questions because I think that there was a lot of pondering going on and a lot of thought. And so we definitely appreciate you providing deeper understanding and expansion for us to be able to go out and do what we do with a greater understanding of how better to help and serve those that we interact with. So we really appreciate you for sharing your time and your knowledge. We are thankful.
Thank you.
And again, this information will be shared. Charmaine has been gracious enough to share her PowerPoint with us, so that will be provided for you soon after. So if you have any questions, please feel free. You do have her contact information. And again, we thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.
Well, another great session.
Absolutely.